Welcome to the power of our story. We are a place of safety for our protectors to process the journey together with others that get it. We are building a tribe in the gap where we are losing our protectors to hopelessness and suicide. We do this by storytelling, as our stories connect us. You can reach out to us at the power of our story and meet our amazing community that cares about you and understands. Please do not spend years suffering in silence. And David, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. I'm David Berez. I'm going to be hosting tonight, and we're featuring John Kelly. Thank you, John, for being here. John is a 30-year veteran of law enforcement that has had a wide variety of specialized assignments, and having been involved in hundreds of critical incidences, the greatest threat to his own survival didn't come from the greatest threat to his survival didn't come from the 3 attempts on his own life from suspects, but it came from within. As an alcoholic and an addict and an adulterer, in his own words, that's just the A's, LOL. So he developed a wellness program for first responders that addresses the personal, professional, and financial, physical, and mental health of police officers. The program is called Sometimes Heroes Need Help. He also authored a book called Surviving the Self-Inflicted Wounds, A Deputy's Life of Redemption. And he feels blessed to be able to pay it forward. John also hosts a podcast, which I can say I'm proud to have been a guest on a while back. And I look forward to hearing everything he has to say today. And John, my friend, take it away, buddy.
Well, thank you. It's really great to see everybody here tonight. And again, bless Sarah for putting this group together. I wanted to talk tonight about something that, we typically don't talk about in law enforcement and in the first responder community, and that's the importance of maintaining our relationships at home. My take on trauma isn't traditional. It's my belief that much, if not all, of the trauma we experience ultimately is self-inflicted. That there are times when we see and do things that are really horrific, but I think it's truly the lack of support systems and networks that we establish throughout our lives that end up creating the problems for us. That there's a big push, I think, right now to intervene at a point in time, I think, that where the slide has become an avalanche, and trying to stop an avalanche is near impossible. So the program I developed really focuses on early intervention and taking care of, that self-care component, but taking it to a new level. We're all experts at taking care of everybody else. And at the end of the day, if we just gave half that effort to our own wellness and our own peace, we'd be so much better off. And so the program, like David mentioned, addresses your personal, professional, financial, physical, and mental health. And, I noticed in my my intro, an adulterer. And being an adulterer was really easy. Especially in the law enforcement community. It wasn't something that was frowned upon. It was actually celebrated in the circles that I ran in. And maybe that's just a unique dysfunction of the people that I was surrounded by, but nobody was calling me out for not being faithful to my wife. And I think that not being true, that ripple effect impacted so many areas of my life that I couldn't realize or appreciate in the moment. And so I spend a lot of time now trying to emphasize the importance of you being present and truly being committed in a relationship. I think it's too often too easy for us to use our work as our mistress you know, and when that stops fulfilling needs that we're not addressing, we, you know, we seek that connection elsewhere. And unfortunately, it took me hurting a lot of people before I realized that. Um, if you were to look at me, I had a perfect life. Um, Great paying job, excellent assignments. There wasn't an assignment that I didn't obtain that I wanted. A beautiful wife, a beautiful daughter, and not putting the effort and energy into them. Um, it made it easy to dispose of them. It made it easy to throw them away, and I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed to say that it was easier to be a superstar at work than a superstar at home. And I ran with it. You know, work was easy, and the real serious work that I needed to do, I avoided. Uh, I would I would never I would never have not a discussion about work. That would never happen. But if there was a conflict at home with Mrs. Kelly, I just let it go. I wouldn't talk about it. Even if it, you know, something as simple as, you know, what do you want for dinner? I don't care. You know, whatever you want. Um, and that indifference grew. It got to the point where um, my mom would call sometimes. You know, she'd be up in Boston and we'd be down in Florida, and my wife didn't want to answer the phone. She didn't want to talk to my mom, and you know, not just once, but like every time, my mom would call, and you know, Nicole would do the old, "Shh, you know, I'm not here," and that bothered me tremendously. And instead of having a conversation like a grown adult and going, "Hey, when my mom calls, you don't want to talk to her. That, you know, that's not cool. What's going on?" I let it go. I didn't want to get into an argument or ruin the moment. And so that was like the first wedge in our marriage. And then, you know, mind you, this whole time I'm an alcoholic, right? I didn't stop drinking yet. And so these little wedges kept developing. And it finally it got to the point where the whole lack of connecting and communicating, it finally got to the point where Mrs. Kelly didn't want to be with me anymore. She didn't want to be intimate with me. And I know, David, I know that's a shocker to you. I know what was she thinking? What's wrong with this woman? I know.
I'm like you, buddy. I don't know how that's even possible.
How could that happen? I'm so personable. Um, and so like it was just like, well, if I didn't talk to you about the phone call, I mean, how do I talk to you about this? And so I did um I did the cowardly thing, and I cheated on her. I went out and had an affair. And in the middle of that, nobody's checking me. Nobody's condemning what I'm doing. And it got so bad. I actually went home. I went back to Boston to seek counsel with my dad, which was my dad's an alcoholic and he had already left my mom. So, you know, going to this guy to give me some direction. He was actually almost proud of me, like that I was just like him. And that was kind of messed up. And so when I realized that, I was just like, okay, I'm done. I got to go back. And it wasn't until a friend sat me down. I had this one friend I've had for 35 years. And he said, "Hey, listen, man, you are making some decisions here, and I'm afraid we're going to be burying you in 6 months." Um, and I didn't see that. I didn't see the depth of the despair that I had entered. I was kind of blind to it. And so he sat me down. And he said, these are things that are going to happen, and you need to be okay with it. Like, and it kind of brought to light the importance of making an informed decision. Like, you don't have to stay married. Like, you can be divorced. That's okay. But the decision to do that needs to be one from a place of knowledge. It can't be an emotional decision. And at this time, I was making emotional decisions. Um, I was abusing steroids. I was suspended, going on my second suspension. All the things, all the things that I relied on for stability, I was throwing away. And so his talk with me, these things that were coming, Nicole was going to move on and find somebody else, and I needed to be okay with that, and I wasn't. And somebody else was going to raise my daughter, and I'd still be there, but not to the extent that I would think that I would be. And I had more of a problem with that than I did with somebody going and being with my wife. And so I started making the decision. I started taking back control after that conversation of committing myself back to my family. And it was a lot of therapy. My wife, one of these nights you guys will meet her. She's an amazing woman. After everything that I put her and my daughter through, and my in-laws, she said that because we're in a relationship together, I bear some responsibility for what happened. It doesn't need to be 50-50 or 90-10, but if I'm in this relationship with you, I have to own my part of it. And that was really the beginning of us getting back on track, and kind of realizing that, together we could move forward through this. And without her playing that role and accepting that small degree of responsibility, I'm sure I'm not here, right? Because the part of all this that I circle back to is that when we look at the first responder community and we look at suicide, half the suicides that we experience are the result of a divorce or a breakup of a relationship. And it was that relationship that I almost lost that almost cost me my life. And we don't do anything proactively to keep our relationships intact. Everything that we do at work, everything we do in our profession pulls us from that connection and that foundation of that relationship. And I didn't realize it till it was almost too late. So the importance of maintaining your relationship, the importance of really understanding what family is. Work can tell you they're family, but that's just a bunch of nonsense. Work's work. And, it wasn't until I almost lost everything that I had to, really redefine my role as a father and a husband in my own family. And so that's kind of the initiative, and the focus is to have those difficult conversations and to make it okay. I hate sayings, smash the stigma and it's okay. I want to punch somebody in the mouth every time I hear that. At the end of the day, you can't live a life that's shameful and be okay. You have to be able to look in the mirror and love the person looking back at you. And it took me a really long time to get to that place. There are times that I know in this whole mess of a life that I created, that I was the last person to forgive me. And it took a lot of time. And at the end of the day, I think that if we put that effort and energy into our relationships proactively, I think we can save ourselves a lot of pain and heartache in the long term.
Wow. And a hush falls over the crowd. That is pretty powerful words there. So much of what you say and what you talk about and what you and I have discussed one-on-one just resonates with me. The one part that I think was new to me tonight was the buddy check-in that saved your life. I'm not sure that I knew that piece of the story. And I find that to be incredibly powerful. The whole peer-to-peer concept is putting psychologists out of business in a good way. And any psychologist, social worker, sorry, Trish, that's worth their weight, well, I think would agree with that. And that whole buddy checking concept is so important, and something I know I like to preach a lot about. And if you know somebody that's hurting, check in on them. Even if you don't, just call your friends once in a while, tell them you're thinking about them. They may think you're nuts, and they may ask you what's wrong, but then tell them what's wrong, why you're checking in on them. But that, to me, I find that a really powerful piece. And do you still have that friend today?
I actually, unbeknownst, we moved 30 minutes away from each other. So I see him every week. After a 30-year career together, we probably would only get together at work, and we get together every week as families. I just spent last Thanksgiving with him and his family. So yeah, no, it's a relationship that I've been blessed to have for over
Cool.
30 years.
So I have like two things I want to add, and then we'll open it up to did we just lose? Oh, there he is. So many guys just moved around. No, we'll open it up to some questions. I find it very interesting that your wife was able to give you the grace of owning part of your relationship problem, knowing the choices that you were making. And I love how you frame it as choices, because they were conscious. They weren't mistakes that were unknown to you. And I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking you, how did you allow yourself the grace to let her do that? Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know. I'm not sure if I know how to answer it though. It does make sense.
Because I think that's incredibly special.
Yeah. I don't think so. This is the before Nicole and I were anything, we were best friends. And so if we weren't best friends, I think it would have been easy for her to leave. And so that foundation of, like, she's truly my best friend. I don't have guy nights. I have nights that we go out together and we do things together constantly. And we have, we have our own private time, but I think that if I'm not her best friend, she walks. And so I think her throwing away the relationship was throwing away a friendship. And those are a lot harder to come by than a lover. So I think having her, I think that's what allowed, I fucked up, but that didn't define my entire existence and our entire relationship. I was more than that mistake.
That's all. That's so special. And I can tell that it's still very emotional for you. So I appreciate you taking the opportunity.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Listen, it's never not going to be an easy topic to discuss.
No, I get that. And the other thing you said about always looking yourself in the mirror and needing to love who looks back. My mom started telling me that when I was little. And every time I've heard you say that, I just get like that little pinch in my heart, because I hear her words over and over every time you say that. And you say that often. I love that. Thank you for sharing that concept. I think that's so important. We forget how to love ourselves in this job, and that is very hard to learn to get back. And until we love ourselves, it's very difficult for others to love us. So thank you for sharing that often, and please keep doing that. Let's move to some other questions, because I can talk to you all night, which we did yesterday. So, or the day before. Mandy, you're first.
First of all, David, you touched on everything I was going to touch on. So I'm like, oh, don't say that. Oh, no, I was going to say that. But the emotional piece, I just respect you so much for you really, I mean, you looked like you were on the brink of tears, which made me almost on the brink of tears. And I appreciate the depth that you gave to us. My daughter's boyfriend is a police officer. And when she started dating him and she doesn't live near here, I thought to myself, oh my God, because I knew that mentality. I was in the circle. I'm a nurse, the police, the nurses. I knew that. And Sarah Marie, you might even attest to that. And it was a culture and it was a mentality back when I was a little younger and maybe when this happened with you. But I don't know if it's today, if things are changing, but the culture, at least where he's at, and they're in upstate New York outside of Albany. I'm so happy because the family is important to so many of his friends, like they're married and I trust in him and I trust in the people he surrounds himself with. And you were so right about like, no one called you out on it. You were the guy, you were the man, you were like I worked in the gaming industry for a long time in Atlantic City when it was fresh and hip and hot. And that was the thing. All the dealers, all the cocktail waitresses, all the hosts, it was like everyone cheated and no one called anybody out. And out of everybody back then, only two marriages have been saved. And one is similar to yours. They were best friends first. And she took a little ownership, even though she really didn't have to. She did because she loved him so much. So my hoop to your wife, because she's a hero, and your daughter too, because obviously she went through a lot watching that.
Mandy, you mentioned my daughter. So part of all of this is, kids are really smart. And when you think they're not paying attention, and when you think that they don't know what's going on, this is 10 years ago, Mandy, that this happened. And so I'm sitting out back with my daughter. I got a fire pit out back by the water, and we're just sitting there. And every week we sit out there, I get a good fire going and we talk. And something came up and my daughter asked me about my affair. And
Wow. How old was she?
She was 25.
When the affair happened.
9.
Okay, so she was aware.
Yeah. And so I told her everything, and I told her, your mom and I went to counseling, and then she said to me, did you ever think that I might need counseling? Killed me. Absolutely destroyed me. This is 6 months ago out by my fire pit. Absolutely destroyed me. And so I said, baby, I am so sorry. I was really just focusing on trying to save my marriage. And I didn't think that what I was doing was hurting you. And I damaged her. I damaged my little girl. And I think if more people just knew and understood, and they could grasp the concept of what they're doing and the ripple effect that it has in damaging people's lives, you would never even think of it as an option. But I think, I could go into, all this, my upbringing and all that bullshit and pawn it off as an excuse. It's still a choice in a direction I went in. But my 25-year-old daughter has been scarred from what I did, and I'm supposed to protect her, and I'm the source of the pain. So that was another little shitty tidbit that I served myself.
We love you, John. I just feel like everyone is just like, oh my God, we love you, John. And she would not have talked to you about it if she wasn't healing in her own way. That's part of her healing, is talking to you and being able to understand where you were coming from at the time. And she'll get it together. She's got it.
Yeah, no, we love each other dearly. She's my only child. And so, she knows I always have her back, but, damage was done. And it's just about moving forward.
Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Mandy. Carrie?
Hey, John, thank you so
Hey,
much
John.
for being vulnerable. You're on a call with probably a couple of people but a lot of people that you don't know. And that's a challenge to go to the depth that you have and to be vulnerable and to be raw and authentic and real. And so I admire you, and I definitely admire your wife for her commitment and understanding and having emotional intelligence in dealing with this conflict and finding a resolution and finding a hope. And I am sure that both of you, you know, are probably ecstatic that you decided to focus on trust constantly from this ordeal. What has been, and I'll probably have multiple questions because Sarah knows me. But what has been one of the biggest aspects of self-care in your life over this journey and this path?
This is going to sound weird, but speaking my truth, regardless of the outcome, I never did that. And I thought I was alleviating problems by doing that. And all I did was just create more. I couldn't be honest. And I didn't know how to be honest without hurting. And I think I've grown and matured a bit. So I, I can, I can engage and have conversations with my wife that may not be, the topic may not be ideal, but not having the conversation, my takeaway was, well, not having the conversation doesn't make the problem go away. It just lets it build to something that's, becomes unmanageable. And when things become unmanageable, you don't do what you need to do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that part. You know, we are who we are today because of the things we did in our past. Right. And to offer our self-forgiveness, that has been one of the biggest challenges for me personally. And you said some vital points that we cannot separate who we are personally and professionally. But what we do is when we come home, we kind of turn it off. And it's easy to follow the protocol and the procedures at work, right? Here's the rules, here's the guidelines. I can follow all this easy. But when I get home, it's a completely different story. What is your family dynamics like now for you and your wife on a daily basis compared to what it was previously?
Well, when it was previous, I was working full time and, 70, 80 hours a week. It was easy to be a provider because I didn't have to be home. I used the excuse of providing so I could avoid confrontation, conflict, and connecting. And now I'm semi-retired. I'm home every day, and I can't wait to wake up every morning, Terry. I block off hours at a time, several times a day, just to be with my wife and to go exercise together, go walk on the beach, to go, hang out, to go run errands with her. And, I've made making time with her a priority.
I got two more questions for you.
Good. Just two.
And one of them may take you a second to process, but
It's killing me.
how do you share or release conflict internally and externally? All that conflict and all that frustration that you had before, what do you do a little bit different now?
That's an awesome question. And you know what?
Thank you.
I didn't know I didn't know the importance. So like when you say self-care, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And
yes,
I never practiced self-care. I didn't know what it was because my job was to take care of other people. And I knew how to do that. I just didn't know how to take care of myself. So I read constantly. I've got a desk cluttered with books. I love reading, and I never had time to read. I love exercising. I've always managed to stay, fit and exercise. But I love reading. I love exercising. I meditate. And I got to tell you, Terry, I spend time with the people that I love, and I don't make excuses for not. The sand in the hourglass, man. I'm 56. I've lived more than half my life. This isn't doom and gloom, but if everybody on the screen is going to die someday, and so I don't hit pause, man. Like I go for it, and I connect with people, and I want to be present, and I want to suck this life up, whatever I can get from it.
I love it, brother. Yeah, we can't see our future connections. Probably had no idea the people you were going to impact and connect with. So now I have 2 more questions for you, and then I will move on. Thank you, Sarah. Where do you find your inspiration to do what you do?
I think it's just an extension of what I've always done, like what we've all done.
Community service.
A life without caring is an empty life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you're blessed enough to wake up in the morning, you got to pay it forward. You owe somebody something. And so it's really, it's about leaving this place better than we found it.
I agree. I always say that, it's in our DNA. Those that had served in the military or public service, it's in our DNA that we want to give and we care for our community. Final question. Since you're a reader and I love to read,
yes,
what are like some of your favorite books you've read recently?
I'm working
that have
on
made the biggest impact on your life.
Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker.
Yeah. So he's got them all on his desk.
When That Day Comes by Chris Hoyer.
Okay.
On Hunting, Colonel Grossman. And Rudge, Reasoned Resiliency.
Love it, brother. Thank you for allowing me to ask all those questions. And once again, I really appreciate your vulnerability. That's one of the keys to our success personally and professionally, is being raw, authentic, genuine, and real. I say that vulnerability is one of the easiest ways to tell is that if you feel like you're holding back, or you feel like you're in a relationship where somebody's holding back, then you're not being vulnerable. And I can see that today that you no longer hold back.
Can't.
Mm-hmm.
I can personally attest that John Kelly does not hold back.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you again, brother. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Great conversation. Who we at? Janet.
Thanks. And thanks a lot, John, for sharing. So I'm going to talk from the spouse's side, because we were married 10 years before I went into the force. And I don't know if you know much about the RCMP, but we moved around a lot. And so we lived in this small community on an island for 2 years and then transferred. And my husband was a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. So when they're in their uniform, they look pretty damn good and are very attractive to other women. And spouses can be jealous, or that's how marriages break out, right? Anyhow, we moved to another community, another island further away. And she wrote him a letter saying she wanted to have an affair with him. And being the person he is, he shared that letter with me. I can still remember it. And we've been married for 50 years, almost 51 years now. And he just was in shock. So I'll leave it there. That didn't happen. He wrote her back, said no thanks, he wasn't interested. But about a year later, 2 of the wives in our community contacted me at 2 different times in the same day to say they heard a rumor my husband was having an affair. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I can be quite gutsy. And I guess that showed with my eventual force, working with the force. I got a babysitter, got my hair done, and went and met him for lunch. And at that time, the headquarters was quite small. So we're sitting at a table with the inspectors and everybody for lunch. I surprised him for lunch. And when everybody left, I said, so are you having an affair? And the rumor was he was having an affair with the secretary, I don't know, of his section or something. Anyways, he didn't say anything. And years later, we talked about it. And I said, why didn't you say anything? And he says, I didn't know what I was going to say or what you were going to do. So long story short, it didn't happen. She was pregnant with twins. And the thing was, communications is so key. You said that, it was easier just to be working in that. I was home with the kids. And so I had more time maybe to think about it or to, I don't know. But he was working away a lot. He worked on weekends. He was a motorcycle instructor on weekends. He was at work all the time and never went out basically without me unless he was working. So I always told him he deserved a medal if he was having an affair. But it was material for us later. We were asked to teach a marriage prep class years later. And that was our biggest talk between the two of us, was sharing on the communications and how important it is to ask. And it took courage. I don't know what I did, but I think that's where a lot of marriages fail, is because one or the other or both are afraid to ask the question or to say, let's talk about this. And I don't know whether you've heard of Marriage Encounter, but we went through Marriage Encounter, which was just building on communicating better with your spouse. And that, I think, really served us too. But we always said when we gave presentations, you can't drive your car forever without a tune-up, so you shouldn't drive your marriage forever without tune-ups. And so that's from the spouse side. So thank you so much for sharing. It brought up some memories.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Awesome. Sarah Marie.
Well, thank you, John, for sharing your story and coming on here. There's a lot of similarities kind of in what you're saying. So I help Aaron Terrell, who's not here tonight, but we co-facilitate on Fridays, the suffering in silence. And we've kind of been bringing up, how to communicate to your spouse and talk to your spouse, because or family, whoever is your person, within your family, when you can't communicate with them, that can really force you, not force you, but keep you in that silence. So I really appreciate, you sharing tonight, everything that you shared, because it really goes along with and what Janet's saying, the not communicating and how it just digs that hole deeper and deeper and deeper, when really I think we would think of the communication as the ladder rungs that get us out of the hole. So each conversation is a ladder rung that helps bring us out of that hole that a lot of us, I think, are in as first responders, just because of the nature of kind of what we do. But I do really appreciate too your concept of it being self-inflicted, because I think you're right on with that trauma. Like, we can experience the trauma, but we can choose to be resilient and heal from it, or we can choose to not heal from it. And when we don't heal, it's usually behaviors and actions that just keep self-inflicting everything. So my question for you, and this kind of goes back to Carrie's question, because something clicked with me on the self-care. And you had said, we know how to take care of everybody else, but we never know how to take care of ourselves. And so what kind of clicked for me, because I've done a lot around self-care, is, that concept of, yes, we know what we need to do for everybody else, but it's not necessarily sitting down and reading the book or doing yoga. Like, when we respond to, like for me, when I respond to my patient, I'm not, in my patient's room saying, well, let's do some yoga. I know you're having some pain right now, so let's do some yoga. So the concept of self-care, I think, is completely different than our job. We're caring for other people in a certain way within the job, but the care that we need to do for ourselves looks different than than how we, interact with the community. And so I was just kind of curious after saying that, maybe kind of your thoughts on that, and how you determined to kind of, so to back up Carrie's question, what was the process in finding your self-care? Like, what did you do? How did you realize what things you needed to do for your self-care?
A lot of it initially started with when Nicole and I would sit and talk. Like something would come up, and she would ultimately say something like, "You're not going to revert back to that guy. Like, we're going to talk." And so it took me a long time to be comfortable talking about uncomfortable things in my relationship, because my default had always been just don't discuss it. And she wouldn't let me off the hook on that, and that was the thing. It was like, she's not going to give me a pass on not having the conversation, because she knows what happened last time we stopped talking about the things that couples need to talk about. And so it just got back to, I guess, what a lot of people would call the basics, just having time to communicate and to connect, and not be in such a rush to pass each other, in the hallway. I think that was the one of the biggest parts of my starting to care again.
Mm.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah. So that connection with her, yeah, starting to care again. Because I can relate to your story in some way. I have a history of adultery as well, and just that shame is a big disconnector from the world, and from yourself too, and it blocks so much of being able to care about yourself. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Being able to reestablish that connection and caring. You have to care about yourself before you can practice self-care.
Yeah, no doubt.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah Marie. Todd.
Hey, John.
Todd.
Wow, this has been a great night. I had no idea when I asked you to join us here that it would turn out to be such an amazing session. I had a couple of questions, and then you talked about your daughter, and you completely redirected what I was going to talk about, and I thought I'd give you maybe a little gift. So growing up, my grandpa was a King County Sheriff's deputy. My dad was a King County Sheriff's deputy, and that man was my hero. I still remember being a little kid every day, waiting for that big ass Harley Davidson come down the driveway and see my superhero pulling in, and then it all fell apart. He had an affair, and it ended my mom and dad's marriage. And it wasn't until after I'd been through my own hell, and finally, because of a buddy check, which saved my life and got me into the therapy I needed, I realized that when I started my career as a firefighter, my bucket of trauma was already 3/4 full. And that was from my childhood. And that was from the guilt and the shame that I had taken onto myself because of the end of my parents' marriage. And I think anybody that's involved in this realizes that is so common for young children who come from a divorce or an experience with infidelity take that guilt and that shame upon themselves. And I had no idea until just a couple of years ago when I got into my therapy that I was carrying that from the time I was 6 years old, when my hero, my dad, disappeared. And but when I got through, and this involved EMDR therapy, and then I learned even more just very recently when I went through the 22-0 protocols. But when I first disclosed what was going on, and this was after 30 years of dealing with PTSI and never telling another soul, I had my mom and my dad, who had by this time had been divorced for over 30 years, and my brother and my sister, and I was disclosing to them exactly what I'd been going through. I could see in my dad's face, and this was online, I could see the guilt on his face from what had happened that 35 years ago when I was, when I was so young, and what he had done had broken up their marriage. And I realized that having come through what I'd gone through and dealt with that shame and that guilt on my part for what had happened, I realized that, man, Dad and I got to have a conversation. And I know that when your daughter came to you and said, hey, did you ever think about the fact that I might have needed therapy? That had to have been a real kick in the nuts.
Yeah.
And, but I'm here to tell you, that was probably the greatest thing that could ever happen. You probably know this. That conversation that you had with your daughter was probably the absolute best thing that could have happened in your relationship with her, because now you've got an opportunity to work through that together. My dad had never talked to me about it, about his own guilt and his own shame about what had happened and about what he had done, and but what his responsibility and his accountability was for that. But until I opened up and had that kick in the nuts conversation with my dad about how that affected me, that gave him the opportunity to open up about his own guilt and his own shame about it. And it gave me the opportunity to forgive him. And I could absolutely, the change that came over him with knowing that I had forgiven him for what had happened. And that could only happen after I dealt with what was going on in my own brain. But that was a real turning point in the relationship with my dad. And so as much as a kick in the nuts that was, it was probably the greatest gift maybe that you and your daughter could have for your relationship.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I definitely view it as such.
Thank you, Todd. Sarah.
Okay. John, thank you so much for coming on and being so vulnerable. We have never had a talk that's been focused on this issue. This is the elephant in the world. This, not just the room. This is going on. It's the reality. But what you showed is what love can do when you care, when you have to have a forced reset to figure it out. How do you get back on the horse with the person you love and do it differently and communicate? You have given anybody who watches this, and I don't know where everybody is on the group, but you've given the gift to be this courageous, to share something difficult. My husband and I have been married for 32 years, and we have been surrounded a lot. That's kind of our role, where we were always connected with families. And, when something like this comes up, you learn to communicate. It's the thing that is so heartbreaking is how many people just don't know how to talk. They don't know how to communicate. And having this forced reset that you had, forces those the talking beforehand, of maybe what you're struggling with, or what the needs are, or, whatever it is. So, the beautiful side of your marriage has really come out. You guys cared and you loved each other enough, and your daughter, you cared enough to tackle this, and that's no easy thing. So I appreciate that so much. John, you're already my buddy. I love the courage. I love the courage with everybody in this group, whatever the issue is. It's because people have decided to step out and tackle whatever the Goliath is. So you are another one. Thank you for being in our tribe. I do want to say, again, look at what happened in the progression, what happened with John. The people who were surrounding him, who he surrounded himself with, congratulated the behavior that could have destroyed him and his family. And so it's one of those things, my husband, he has the same men every Friday morning at 7. They always get together and they keep each other honest in life, just like that God-sent friend that you had. We always have families together on Sunday. This has been happening. And, listen, none of us are perfect. We all have our different struggles, all the things that we have to fight for. But when we can communicate and we have friends that won't judge us, and we can be really open about hard things, that is a gift from God. That is, to me, that's part of a relationship with God, is having people that you can be grossly real with. So I celebrate you and your family, John, because you did it. You conquered, and sounds like you were going to stay on that road. So I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and Chris and Nat.
Thank you, John, for your honesty. This really has been enlightening, because, like as Sarah said, it's been a subject that nobody really touches on. But my question for you is, what advice would you have for someone who wants to have that hard conversation, but is afraid of pushing them away? Because I have someone in my life who, professionally, you look at him, he's doing well, he's progressing in his career, but his relationships at home and beyond are falling to pieces. I mean, and I don't think his friends are being honest with him. I feel like it is that congratulatory environment. But as someone who loves him unconditionally and is very close to him, what advice would you give to someone like me?
The only experience I can draw on is my own. So, I got to throw that big disclaimer out there that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've tried not to repeat the same mistake twice. That relationship that you have with that person, I think that it's important first to let them know where you're coming from. You're coming out of from a position of love and caring, because I think a lot of times that initial approach, if not done correctly, can become confrontational and not welcoming. They can't think for a second that you're judging them, or that you don't approve of them as a person. And I think once you get past that hurdle, letting them know how much you care about them and why you're bringing this topic or this conversation to light, because I think a lot of times, sometimes, and this is just my, psych 101, a lot of things become like self-fulfilling prophecies. Like if we act out, there were times when I was acting out where it was almost like I wanted to get caught, because I just needed it to stop. And I, I, I didn't care how it would stop. It's so very reckless. And I think the hard reality is, there's always something else going on that forces you to step out on someone. It's not just because. And so until you can understand and address whatever that is with that individual, and that's them coming and being real with themselves. Like, why do you feel the need to do this? And then based on that response, if that's the real reason, then, tackling it that way. My situation is not unique. It is, I'm a carbon copy of a million people out there that are not being faithful and true to the people that they swore they would be. And so I think it starts with approaching the conversation from a position of love and caring, and then maybe bringing to light the fact that, this behavior, it's gonna if this is what you want, you're going about it really there are a lot of other easier ways to end a relationship than to cause the pain and suffering that they're causing. That's kind of a shitty answer. I'm sorry, but that's like the best I got right now.
I think you pretty much just confirm what I'm feeling in my heart. It's just finding the courage to, take that chance and have that conversation.
Well, I don't think you could listen. There's one thing that I've learned is that if you come from a position of love and caring, there's no wrong way to approach somebody. If they know that you're coming at them because you love them and you care about, they may not like what you're talking about, but they're going to know in their heart that you mean well and you mean nothing but the best for them. And I don't think you can ever go wrong starting a conversation from that standpoint.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I agree with that. Thank you, John. And thank you, Nat. Chris, did you have something too, or?
I got too much to this. It's going to be a discussion, not a question. So I think you guys covered most of it already. But anyway, I want to say thank you very much, Sean, for reading my book. And please reach out if you have any questions about that or anybody else does. I would love to get your feedback on that whole thing. So
I think you need to check your calendar, because I think we're sitting down soon.
okay, you let me know. I'm sure I got you written down someplace, but
I'm sooner than you think.
all right, sounds good. Thanks.
That's awesome. So wow, this it's John and I should say talked, was it Wednesday, I guess. I said that we're gonna have a ton of fun and we're gonna make this barrel of laughs, and we're gonna go through this and really enjoy it. This got so freaking deep that I don't know where it went sideways from my original plan, but
I blame you, sir.
Oh no, my goodness. But this was awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. And my last question for you is, what is the favorite thing for you to do now? What makes you happy today?
Listen, I'm East Coast. It's 10:21. I've already been up an hour and a half past my bedtime. So
quickly,
I'm gonna read a chapter of a book and go to bed.
Nice. Good for you. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being part of our group here at the Power of Our Story. You're awesome. You're a good friend. You're an incredible inspiration, an incredible podcast host and producer of your own show, which is awesome. And for those of you that aren't listening to it, I highly recommend that you do. It is entertaining. And as you can tell, John likes to talk, and he does a great job of it. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being inspiration. Thank you for being a leader in a space where voices often are not enough. So you're a true inspiration, my friend, and we appreciate having you here.